Hi, are you ready to paint splashing, crashing water? That's what we're going to try today. Moving water is very white, which is why they sometimes call it white water. So a lot of this is going to involve preserving the white of the paper, but with no hard edges because it's soft and there's a lot of movement. Here's some examples of watercolors. I've attached them onto the Google Classroom. And we're going to try some different techniques, and I will try and create this waterfall. One of the things you'll notice right here is some dry brush, and that's kind of how we'll start. And that gives the effect of spotted water. Another thing we can try is fan brush to try and show that movement. This is scratching with an X-Acto knife. That's this. There's a lot of spattering. It looks like there's some spattering with blue on white, and there's some spattering with opaque white or with masking fluid at the beginning. So we'll try all of those different things. So you can do a waterfall like I'm going to do. The other thing is in order to really accentuate the water, the white of the water, we're going to put dark around it. So a lot of times you'll see dark rocks around it. And we can use a palette knife to create that texture of the rocks. Okay, another thing is sandpaper, and to scratch and sand some of the areas out. So we'll be trying that technique too. Okay. Another option is crashing waves. So here's a photograph of water splashing against rocks. It's going to be the same types of techniques, wet into wet and spattering and X-Acto knife and so on. And so here's an example of one demonstration. You can see I spattered using a toothbrush, works pretty good, or paint on a brush and then hitting it on the handle of the other brush. This white is either, I can't really remember because I did this a while ago, it's either opaque white paint, such as this Chinese white, or spattering ahead of time with masking fluid, such as Peebo drawing gum. Okay, so I'm going to put those aside, and you guys can choose what you want to use for your subject. I've put a few photographs for you to work from if you want on the Google Classroom. So what I've done ahead of time, let me just grab here's some sandpaper so I have that ready. What I've done ahead of time is take a toothbrush and gotten it wet and put it on some soap, and then I dipped it in the Peebo and spattered. So you can see the spattering is kind of random, and there's some big ones that I don't really want. So I'm going to get rid of the larger spatters and maybe ones that I don't want up there. And you have to wait for that to dry in order to do that. But I've got a lot of white spatter that will be here. Okay. The next thing is I'm going to mix some blues, or it could just be browns. In this particular one, you don't really see a lot of blue. And I've drawn a very light get that out of the way. I've drawn a very light drawing with pencil, and hopefully you can see that. Just very, very light. And I'm actually going to erase that a little bit so that it's not quite as obvious, because it's going to be pretty white on those edges, and I don't want pencil to be showing. So I just indicated a little bit of where it's going to be. Okay, so wherever the water is going to be showing a splash. So Well, part of this is going to be dry brush at first, but I'm thinking I'm going to pre-wet this area up here so that ends up meeting the ground up there in a soft way. And as you can see on this example, this is a little bit hard edge, and so I went in with sandpaper later on and softened that. But I'm going to try and make it a little soft at the very beginning by wetting this area and then wetting this down here. So wherever the paint meets the, you know, and actually I don't have to worry about this too much until later, but because I'm not going to go all the way up. The whitest part of the waterfall will be toward the top. So I'm going to just go ahead and wet the bottom here where this pool is, it's hitting the pool and it's crashing back up. So I'll get that ready to go. And I might want to go ahead and wet the edges too in case I go to the edges, but I probably won't too much. So I think I might try my Yin Min Blue here, just to, I haven't really tried it very much, so I got that ready. And I'll get a little bit of Cobalt Blue, which isn't much different, and I'm going to dull it a little bit with some of the brown, or the cooler, the warmer colors. So I have my test paper, and I want this to be fairly light, so I'm going to water it down pretty much. So I've got a pretty watery mixture, and I'm going to dry my brush, and I'm going to go backwards, stopping up here a little bit so that stays white. And I'm going to drag my brush sideways, and actually I'm going to use my larger brush, and just get that dry brush effect. So even though the bristles are going this way, I'm going to drag them like this. And that'll get that rough look there. You see where it's hit the edges there? So already I have a little bit of softness. I can feed a little bit more water into here. And we don't want that to be hard edge. Okay, now I'm going to start working on the rocks on the side and this pool down here. So maybe I'll start with this pool down here, and I'm going to wet all of that. And maybe just as the references, I'll go a little bit green. I'm trying to remember where this was. I'll figure it out later and let you know in class or on the Google Classroom. So I'm going to add a little bit of green to my blue, and I'm going to still go into a dry brush down here to get that feeling of the pond or the stream. Oh, I forgot I pre-wet it, but so wherever it hits, we want that to be real soft. And you can see where I didn't wet the paper first, there's that nice dry brush. So we can go back in later on. The other thing you can use is a tissue, and you can go in and, just like if you were making clouds, you can kind of lift it that way. So we don't want this, we want this to be nice and white. Now I'm going to mix up some browns. I'll use ultramarine blue and some light red, which is a very orangey brown. And I can pre-wet it, or I can just go in, let me wet this again, right on the edge here. Go into the waterfall a little bit, but not bring my paint all the way in there. So I'm gonna, and I like, just like when you guys have done your brown mixtures, I like to get some nice mixtures of different colors. And I'm looking at the direction that these rocks are growing, or the movement of the rocks. And since I didn't wet this paper over here, the magic moment will come pretty quickly. I'm getting down here. Now I'm getting close to where I want it to be soft edge, so I'm going to wet this. Wherever I want it to be soft edge, I wet it first. So see how that's looking nice and soft as it meets that place where it's crashing against it. And I might be able to show some of this texture already. See how that's already gotten too dry, so I can re-wet that and wait for that magic moment. And I'm starting to show rocky cliffs now. I'm using, another thing that works really well is a credit card. So let me grab a credit card over here. And here we go. So just a cut credit card, it actually sometimes works even better than, so here's a credit card, and I'm gonna see how nicely that works. And it's also a little bit drier, so I'm getting some more of that feel of the rocks. Another thing I can do later on is go in and darken some of those crevices. So we've got that nice soft edge there. So I'm going to wet the other side. Make sure that's nice and wet, and wet down here where the rocks might be meeting that, and I'll get some different browns and blues and so on. And this has a little bit different feel to it. So I'm going to stop there and let that kind of ooze in. The more crashing and splashing you have, the more fun it is, I think. Let's go in and get some yellow up in here. That new gamboge was kind of wet. So. Now this is the top, my pencil line is indicated this is the top of the waterfall. So this is going to be rocks up here. So I've got to be careful that I don't get too near that. Oops. So nice muddy colors like what you guys have done before. And then I might go ahead and change what I'm seeing up here and turn that into like a pine trees or something like that off in the distance. Maybe more like this. So I might change that reference a bit. So I'm going to watch for the magic moment again, get my credit card handy, and scrape into it. And it's nice to have the reference to give you, not to copy so much, but just to kind of give you some ideas of movement so you don't end up doing the exact same thing all the time. You get some variety. To your rocks. Cliffs. Nice. Okay, what I want to do in here, I see that nice dark area, so I'm going to go real dark with ultramarine blue, but again, I want to be careful and wet this edge here. And I might go ahead and wet the top of the waterfall just in case I go over in that area. And actually it looks almost like it's turning the corner there. I might not do that, but so let's get this. Don't be afraid of color, exaggerate your colors. Anything that's dark next to the waterfall will make it stand out even more. So the darker you can get it, the better. I like that little big crack in the rock there. Ooh, exciting. I can just hear that crashing, splashing. So now I'm going to go back and I see some pretty strong darks in here. So I'm going to go back in with some dry brush, and this is almost dry. I think I'll go ahead and dry this. Scratch that, scrape that a little bit. You don't want so much lines in it. I got a lot of lines, unfortunately, but you want more of a scraping of an area like a rock, you know. So kind of twist it and turn it on its side rather than getting a lot of definitive lines. So now wherever the masking fluid went, if it lands on white, it's not going to do much good. So hopefully it's landed on some of the areas that are dark. So now I'm going to go in and do some more dry brush down here, but I want to remember to pre-wet because it's going to be soft right where it meets that. So I'm going to go dry brush for water. This is the pool that it's running into. And I'm going to do a little bit more dry brush going up on here. Get a little bit more definition, because it's just like clouds, even though you think, oh, well, they're not a solid form, but they do have shadow in them, just like the splashing water will have shadow in it. And if you look at this reference here, you see that shadow in there? It's not going to be just solid white. I'll show you another. Here's one where I went in and added that dark value or medium dark value, you got to leave some pure white of the paper, but it will make the white look whiter if you can get some areas of shadow around it. Okay, so I'm gonna go in, take a tissue and re-wet this a little bit because it got a little bit hard edge, and soften that. Wherever some hard edge happened, you might want to go in and soften it a little bit. So now that's looking pretty crashy. Another thing I can do is fan brush. So I'm going to grab my fan brush and I'm going to put some paint on it. Be careful if it gets too close together, if the bristles start to get, you know, kind of separate them a little bit. And I'll give some more movement. So hit it with a, if it looks a little bit too dark, hit it with a tissue. So anything we can do to show that splashing. It almost makes me want to make noise, like emphasize that dark. So if I want to show the top of the waterfall and that maybe there's some sky or trees back there, I'm going to put a really light. Notice how it got a little bit lighter back there because it's kind of going off in the distance. So I'm going to indicate some light areas, but once I get to the waterfall, get some nice clean water here, I want to have it go a little bit soft. Let's get some more green. Ooh, I don't like that. There we go. Now I'm coming down here. And just indicate that there's some things going off in the distance, and then maybe add some trees later. And tissue. So I want that to look a little soft. Now while it's still kind of wet, but not super wet, I can take a small brush and show some little pine trees that are off, you know, if the waterfall, if the stream has turned a corner, there might be pine trees off there. So I'm going to use some peacock blue and a little yellow and maybe some ultramarine blue too. Let's make it kind of dark. Here's a little bit of Windsor green with some burnt sienna. So I've got some dark areas here. And let's see if it's, so it's kind of wet into wet. So these little trees look soft and far away. I'm just kind of dabbing like a tree trunk and then some little things off to the side there. Maybe show a hill, another hillside. So this is all kind of vague. We don't want to spend too much emphasis right here on those. Just for fun, I sometimes like to drop a little yellow in. Lemon yellow is almost kind of an opaque sort of thing. Just bring a little light into it. Just kind of spattering with some lemon yellow. Spatter, it works better to spatter using a. Okay, so I got a little light hitting it. That's fun. Now, I always tell you guys, as soon as you put a color somewhere, you've got to repeat it. So I've introduced a new color. So maybe what I better do is take my lemon yellow and limey green and just add a hint of it down in here. Maybe even a bit of it reflected in here. so it's not isolated. You want it to be entertaining. Okay, let's do a little bit more. Where's my Yin Min? Yin Min, where are you? Oh, here it is. Let's put just a little more Yin Min down in here. A lot of white down in here because this is sparkly too. Another thing I can do is, at this point, take some diluted color, and I'm going to go with sort of a blue-gray here, Yin Min, and spatter a little cool color, or a little color. So I'm going to have not only the white that when I take the masking fluid off, but it's going to be some other color in there too. Okay, I gotta stop here because I might cover up my white, and that's not what you want to do. You want to have a lot of white left here. So this, I'm going to dry this, and I'm going to put one more layer of trees a little bit closer and darker on dry paper. Well, let's do this first. So the wet into wet trees are farther back, higher up. And then we'll dry this. And I can't peel off my masking fluid until everything's completely dry. Well, and I also can't use sandpaper until it's completely dry. Sandpaper is good for the rough water down here too, the turbulent water at the bottom. And the edges, if they got too hard edged. Okay, I'm going to add with a smaller brush. I'm going to add some darker pine trees. So it's just that pine center, the trunk, and then some dabbing on either side, overlapping, because it's not a pine tree farm, it's not a Christmas tree farm. They're randomly growing in the woods. And my assumption is that this is flattened out and we're seeing the other side of the stream here off in the distance. So we got a little bit of depth. And again, by putting this darker here, it's emphasizing the white. It's really turbulent right where it's heading over the edge of the falls. Wet into wet. Maybe get a little darker right in here. So I can show you the sandpaper a little bit better. Okay, let's dry it. Okay, I'm gonna take the masking fluid and not quite there yet. So right in the middle of this video, the doorbell rang. The first time it was delivery from the frame company. The second time I got some flowers, and I don't know who they're from, so I'm going to anxiously await. I'll have to edit that part out, but when the doorbell rang again. But that's what happens when you make it at home. Make the video. Okay, so I'm gonna, now you can see where I had spattered the masking fluid. We can see that the white sparkles, you know, kind of coming through here. Wonderful. It's like little surprises. And it's not showing where it was totally white. It's only showing where it had hit on dark areas. So kind of keep that in mind when you're spattering the masking fluid. Put it where you figure the darkest areas are going to be. I have a lot of it down here. But remember, we had some spattering going on down there too. Let's try that again. Real light. So now that's spattering with paint. I could also spatter with opaque white if I needed to, but I think the masking fluid does the trick. So now the last thing I want to show you is some sandpaper. And sometimes it's better to not use the really, really hard grit. This is like an 80, so it's going to be real rough. And it's almost going to make it like lines. And so I like the 220 or something. So what I'm going to do, see where it's kind of hard edge? Oh, I got to make that real dry. X-Acto knife. That's the other thing I want to say. So all of these, you don't have to use all of these tricks. I'm kind of showing you all as the demo, but you can use these exact same tricks and techniques if you're doing a crashing wave. Make sure that the wave doesn't have really light sky around it, that it has deep dark ocean or dark rocks. So you want to have it against dark ocean. If it goes up here into the sky, it's not going to show as much if it's light against light, so have it against dark areas. So a little sandpaper. Let's get it. Next grit up here. We'll just soften any hard edges, because remember, it's like clouds. The symbol for moving water is soft. So wet into wet and other techniques. Getting back down to the white of the paper. If you're going to use opaque white, I wouldn't put heavy opaque white anywhere. I'd just use it for little spatters. And here's the X-Acto knife. So let's say you wanted to show a few more spatters here. You use the X-Acto knife on dry paper. This is still a little damp, but you don't cut it, you go sideways, just like we did with the palette knife. So down here, a little bit more scratches. It's still a little damp, so it'd be better to wait for it to be really... but here's what it looks like if it's on real dry paper. This was created all by an X-Acto knife. So you could have another little falls coming down here that I would take my X-Acto knife and just scratch into that, so it would be like a little secondary fall. Where it spills over a little bit more. And then at the top, we want it to spatter a little bit as it's splashing over the edge. Not only do you want to keep it light, but you might want to show a little bit more random scratching. This X-Acto knife is not. Let me get a, we'll show you. So there's another drippy. I'm cutting right into the paper. I'm totally damaging. This is Arches paper. Will tolerate that. We're scratching, splashing at the bottom. Again, it's taking big chunks out because it's not quite dry. But okay, so hopefully that gives you some ideas. A lot of splashing and crashing. Okay, I think you'll like this. Be loose, be crazy, have wild colors in there. You know me, I always go back in and fix it later on, but for this first run, this is looking pretty good. I might go in and soften some of these areas and that kind of thing. So it would be maybe soften that a little bit so it's not quite so strong. So just by rubbing it with the edge of the damp brush. Okay, I better stop before I get it too dark, before I lose my white. Okay, enjoy.